May be seated. John chapter 13 this morning. John chapter 13. American Revolution. A man in civilian clothes rode by, and there were a bunch of soldiers, and they were trying to build a barricade. And there was one man there. He was yelling at him and screaming at him, and the man in civilian clothes stopped and said, "Sir, why aren't you helping them?" And he said, "Well, I'm the corporal, and I'm going to tell them what to do." And so he said, "Oh, sorry." So the man got down off his horse, helped the exhausted men to finish building the barricade. And he looked at the corporal and he said, "The next time you need a job like this done, and there's not enough men to do it, call upon your commander-in-chief, and I will come and help you." The man was George Washington. George Washington understood a basic lesson of leadership, and that is a leader is a servant. And really a basic principle of discipleship of the Christian life is being a servant. I often think that why doesn't God move more among us? And maybe sometimes it's about us and not about Him. Maybe we're too full of ourselves. You heard about the pastor? He was voted the most humble pastor in America, and his church gave him a medal. But the next Sunday they had to take it away from him because he wore it. Sounds like something I'd do. Humility is like that, isn't it? We may do a humble act, and then we pat ourselves on the back for it. Or we serve somebody, but then we're kind of looking for that recognition. It's part of our human makeup. It's part of our human being. We like the praise. We like to be noticed. Nobody does not like to be noticed for what they do. Last week we talked about our identity, and Jesus said, He said this. Oh, I didn't put that verse in there. John chapter 13, verse 3 said this: Jesus knew the Father had given everything into His hand, and that He'd come from God, and that He was going to God. Was going back to God. So we learned last week His identity. Jesus knew what God had given Him. He knew who He was. He knew where He was going. And so He had this sense of identity. He knew exactly who He was and what He was doing. And that's very important if we're going to be servants, because we understand who we are. We understand who is in charge of our lives. We understand who we're serving. And if you want to read a passage this week, Philippians chapter 2, verses 1 through 12, really talks about the mindset of Jesus, who being in the form of God, did not think it robbery to become equal with God. He humbled Himself and became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross. And we see this attitude of humility, this attitude of service, this attitude of just bowing down. And that's what Jesus did here, right? When He washed the disciples' feet, He knelt down. And kneeling down, it's kind of a sign of humility, a sign of submission. It really shows our attitude. And so this attitude is really, it's very key. It's essential. It's basic for our Christian life if we're going to understand what it means to follow Jesus and the implications it has in our lives, and namely our relationships. Having this attitude of service. I'll give you a verse to memorize this week, Proverbs 22:4. By humility and fear of the Lord, and notice what it says, are riches and honor and life. Now, that's not what society says. That's not what our flesh says. That's not what the movies betray. They betray somebody who is conniving, somebody who's prideful, somebody who knows how to manipulate, somebody who's ambitious, somebody who's ready to walk all over other people. Those are the examples that we see of people that get ahead of life and obtain riches and attain honor and attain life. But the Bible gives us the whole opposite. He says, by humility and fear of the Lord are riches, honor, and life. Memorize that verse. Think about that verse. Let that verse rule in your mind. And think about what God would have you to do. So we come to this passage, John chapter 13, and notice what it says. Jesus rose from supper and laid aside his garment, took a towel and girded himself. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet and to wipe them with a towel with which he was girded. Now, you have to understand, this is a different cultural situation. I did put a video on Facebook, our Facebook page, if you want to watch that. It's about a 3-minute video. Kind of explains the context of this passage. We don't really wash feet because our feet are covered with socks and shoes, so we're a little better. But in Jesus' time, when they sat at the meal, it was customary. They had sandals. Their feet would get very dirty. And so it was customary. It was hygienic. It was a tradition that there would be a basin of water and towels, and before you ate, you would wash your feet. And usually it was the work of a servant. And so here they come. Here they're gathered with Jesus. Remember, we're in the Last Supper. We're with Jesus right before he's going to go to the cross. He had preached his last sermon publicly. Now he's withdrawn. He's with the 12 in a room. And he's having this time of, if you will, last-minute instruction, chapter 13 through 17. We're learning some principles here of discipleship, really that are key to our growth. You'll not grow as a Christian if you don't learn humility. You'll not grow as a Christian if you don't learn humility and servitude. And so this is the attitude Jesus had. He demonstrated to us this other attitude. And so we learn 5 principles about the attitude of a servant this morning. First of all, a servant should be ready to act even if no one is acting. You don't need a committee to serve. Like, we like to form a committee, talk about it, or maybe an informal promptu committee, or maybe a Facebook, gripe. Why doesn't this happen? Why don't we do this? We need to do this, we need to do that. And a lot of times, committee meetings, board meetings, it's a lot of talk. Jesus didn't have a committee about it. He didn't get around the disciples and say, well, all right, who's going to wash the feet? Now, they weren't thinking about it, were they? They were just sitting around, ready to see what was going to happen. Nobody was in charge. You don't need an announcement. You don't need to have a launch date. You don't need to post pictures on Facebook. We're going to do this. Jesus, what did he do? He just got up and he served. That's what he did. He saw the need and he acted. Even if nobody else was acting. He didn't need anybody else there to affirm the need. And so he acted. Saw the need. And then he went to fulfill the need. That's what a servant does. And so, first of all, we have to have our eyes open to see the need. And sometimes we don't see the need because our eyes are so focused upon ourselves. We see what we're doing, what we need to do. We're blinded to the needs of others. And there are needs everywhere. All around us there are needs. There are people that are hurting. There are people who need a word of encouragement. There are people facing financial problems. There are people facing spiritual problems. There are needs everywhere that God wants to use you to meet. But you have to have your eyes open. And our society has us so focused in on our own needs. Jesus wasn't thinking about that. He saw the disciples. The towel was there. The water was there. So what did he do? He kneeled down and he started washing their feet. That's what a servant does. He sees a need and he takes action. Doesn't complain about it, doesn't look to others to do it. He sees a need and he fulfills the need. And he doesn't need anybody else to affirm him. And so a servant should be ready to act even if no one is acting. Then a servant needs to stay humble before God. Now, Jesus has this conversation with Peter. Then he came to Simon Peter, and Peter said to him, Lord, are you washing my feet? Peter was a little offended. No, you're not going to wash my feet. I wonder if he was thinking, well, if he washes my feet, then I might have to wash John's feet. Because he knew Jesus was the example, right? Maybe he was thinking that. Maybe, though, he had a respect for Jesus. He was the Christ, the Son of the living God. And he didn't want Jesus stooping down to that level in his mind. He was looking at Jesus as the king. And so he had respect. He didn't understand everything Jesus was showing and demonstrating to him. Jesus answered and said to him, what am I doing now? What I am doing to you, you do not understand now, but you will know after this. Peter said to him, you shall never wash my feet. Jesus answered him, if I do not wash you, you have no part with me. What does he mean, you'll have no part with me? And he goes on, has this discussion about how they're all clean. They're clean, but not all. And he goes on to explain that once we're saved, we're justified by faith, but we still need cleansing. We're still cleansing all the time. Our feet get dirty. We're in this world. And we get dirty with the attitudes of the world, with the dirtiness of the world, with the negativity, with sin, with all these things make us dirty, if you will. And we, as a servant, we have to keep humble with God. And we refer to 1 John, because 1 John chapter 8 says this, if we say that we have no sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. We become defensive. And notice verse 10, Jesus said to him, he who is bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not all of you. And Peter goes on, I want you to wash my whole body. And she says, you don't have to wash your whole body, just your feet. Your feet need to be clean. And a servant does not become defensive. Do you become defensive? If one of your friends says something to you and calls you out, how do you take it? When your husband or your wife or your parents call you out? Or you call out your parents? That's my case now. I have adult kids, so I'm getting called out on the carpet all the time. Or when your pastor calls you out, or somebody else, what's your reaction? No. You're wrong. How could you say that? How could you think that? I'm clean. What does John say if we say we're clean? What are we? Liars. We're liars. We're deceiving ourselves. But here's the good news. 1 John says this, if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to what? Cleanse us. Cleanse us from all unrighteousness. That's what Jesus wants to do. That's what a servant does. Maybe you call a friend and you hear the tone of their voice. They're down. Now you could be a Pharisee and say, well, they're a Christian, bless God, they shouldn't be down. Or you can say, hey, what are you doing right now? Let's meet at Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks, whatever, or Shelburne Falls, wherever, for coffee. Let's talk about it. Let me help you. Let me encourage you. One of the things that I love seeing in our church is people meeting with people and trying to encourage themselves in the Lord. Talking. Praying for each other. Realize that we're all unclean and we all need cleansing and we all need our feet washed. Then we need to be open and willing to wash each other's feet. To help each other out through the difficult times, through the times where maybe we really need a slap in the face. Maybe we are a little stubborn and defensive and we need somebody to lovingly and gently say, you know, your attitude really stinks right now. I love you, brother. We need that washing. So a servant needs to keep himself humble. If you're not humble, you're not going to see others' needs. You're going to look down upon people. And then, thirdly, a servant can't have his own agenda. A servant can't have his own agenda. Sometimes people serve because they want the praise and they want the position. But they're not really serving from the heart. Judas is the example, right? 20 verse 29. For some thought, he was talking about Judas to go out. For some thought, because Judas had the money box, that Jesus had said to him, buy those things we need for the feast. Or that he should give something to the poor. Remember, they were trying to identify the person that would betray Jesus, and they couldn't figure it out. Because Judas was faithful. Now, a servant is faithful, but faithfulness doesn't always define a servant. Judas had a different agenda than bringing glory to God. And sometimes, even in the church, we can serve, but we can't confuse faithfulness with servitude. Judas served, but he had his own agenda, his own motive, his own, if you will, expectations. Now, a servant can't have expectations. Now, this happens in churches when we have work day. I hate using this illustration, but because work day doesn't bring out the numbers as potluck day. Potluck brings people out from all over. In Romania, here, everywhere, it's the same. Work day, you know, we had a good day. We had a good lot of, and I don't want to we've had a lot of good work days. So, but sometimes what'll happen, somebody will show up and they may be the only one. And they start thinking, what's the first thing they say? Thank you. Where is everybody else? So I thought of this. We say this is Satan's working. Maybe it's God's working. Maybe God didn't bring anybody else because God wanted to see if you were really a servant. Maybe God put you there all by yourself. Maybe if there were 3 other people, you'd be standing around talking, drinking coffee, and letting everybody else work. And maybe God put you there all by yourself to see, okay, are you really going to be a servant? If you felt God brought you to serve and do that thing, then what does it matter who came or who didn't come? Now, like I said, it's balance. We should be helping and encouraging each other. But here's the point. If we're really serving, we have to have the right expectations. And we oftentimes become discouraged because we have the wrong expectations. And then a servant follows the example of Jesus. A servant follows the example of Jesus. Verse 14. Then I said, your Lord and teacher have washed your feet. You also ought to wash one another's feet. I'm going to go back to verse 12. So when he had washed their feet, taken his garment, sat down again, he said to them, do you know what I have done to you? So again, Jesus is showing them. In fact, he didn't preach a sermon on being a servant, did he? He said, okay, I'm going to wash your feet. Now, do you understand what I've done? You call me teacher and Lord, and you say, well, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, what does he say? You also ought to wash one another's feet. For I've given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. Most assuredly I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is he who is sent greater than he who sent them. So what Jesus is saying, if I, the Son of God, God incarnate, God in flesh, if I've come to this earth and chosen not to live in the palace, not to have the Roman government serve me, not to have served, I've come to give my life in a ransom for many. If I've come to serve, I've given you an example. Do you understand? Read Philippians 2 this week. Do you understand the mindset of a servant? I've given you this example that you should do. And if I am the greatest, you're the learner, the disciple, then you should learn from me. Because I haven't just given you a theological lesson, I've given you a living example. And by the way, that applies to discipleship, that applies to family life, that applies to marriage life, that applies to work life, that applies to wherever you witness. People want to see that you're a Christian. They want to see an example. Paul said, follow me as I follow Jesus. You can have all the Bible study at home you want. It won't make your kids spiritual if you don't live it. They don't see it. What do they see? Do they see pans flying through the house? They want to see. Jesus said, I'm going to show you. We have 4 gospels of examples of the life of Jesus. If you want to learn what to do as a Christian, we have the Bible, we have the New Testament, we have these examples for us to learn. And then we see finally this morning, a servant is blessed. This word blessed means to be happy, to be well off, to be fortunate, to be supremely blessed. If you're not happy serving, listen up, you're not serving. If you're frustrated, if you're flustered, if you're complaining, but I'm serving so hard. Yeah, you're not serving. You have your own agenda. You have your own expectations. When you're serving, you're serving. You're giving. Somebody said, when you serve, always plan to give more than you're going to get back. Jesus said this, if you know these things, we're good at this, right? If you know, we're Baptists. We know the Bible. From Genesis to Revelation. Not much in between, but we know the Bible. He says, blessed or happy are you if you can debate them, if you can give a good theological outline, if you can quote 500 verses. No. Happy are you if you do them. I read there was a thing on the news. A guy bought a couch from one of these used places. Sat on the couch, was like, this is not comfortable. And he unzipped his daughter unzipped one of the pillows and started bringing out stacks of $100 bills. It was $43,000 in the couch. You guys are going to start buying couches at the Salvation Army, amen? But he went back to the store, found the owner. And the woman's grandfather had left her the house, and she gave the couch away, and he brought the money to her. He felt better. So it was my money. It's the right thing to do. I don't know if the guy was a Christian, but he did the right thing. Let's take a test. A test. You ready? Test. Get your pencils out. Okay? When your pastor talks about sin, do you think about yourself or how it applies to the person next to you? When you are asked to take out the trash, change the dirty diaper, stay with the kids, do you think it's beneath you? Do you do something so someone will see you doing it? Have you, in the midst of serving, become angry because those around you are not serving? On a weekly basis, how many opportunities do you see in which you can serve? Do you take action when you see a need? Or do you email it to the pastor for him to do? Or somebody else to do? So, serving's not easy. Okay? It's makes a nice lesson and sermon. Not too easy to practice. But Jesus said something to Peter. Verse 7, he answered and said to him, "What I am doing, you do not understand now. But you will know after this." I don't think I go back and look back in my life and say, I wish I would have served less. I would look back and say, I wish I would have served more. I look back and think of the times where I became disillusioned or frustrated with service because my mindset was not the mindset of Jesus. When we were in England last fall for the wedding of Elena, Mirel, he's the guy on your left. When he heard we needed a place to stay, he said, "No, you're staying with us. I should stay with us. I'm going to pick you up. I'm going to bring you. Here's my number. Anywhere you need me to take you, we're going to take you." Went to his house, fed us every day. And he said to me several times, he said, "All you did for my family in Romania." And I forgot a lot of things. One thing I didn't forget, though, his brother, we called him Big Dan, because he's big. He's actually lost a lot of weight now, but he was big. Loud and boisterous. And he got saved, and he grew up, a gypsy mindset, always making deals. And I had a car we had bought from Germany, and 1989 Mercedes 190. That's old, but it was automatic, and not a lot of automatics in Europe, especially in Romania. And but it was good because my wife could drive it, and he kept asking me about that car. So finally one day he came with a Caravan. Like, what was I thinking? So I'm going to trade it with you. It's okay. Kind of wore me down. And then traded it with him. And after 2 days, I said, "This car is terrible." Brought it back. So Big Dan kind of swindled me out of a car. Because I never got another car after giving the minivan back. But you'll understand after. You'll understand after. And Mirel just came to the Lord 6 months ago, on fire for the Lord. And when he said those things to me, I said, "Lord, forgive me my anger with situations. Serving isn't easy. Servant isn't always glorious. Servant oftentimes means sacrifice. But in the end, and some of you see on Facebook people that write to us and talk to us, and that's not because I was some great preacher. That's because we served. And when you serve people and you wash their feet and they get clean and their lives are changed forever, they become grateful. So today, as we think about being a servant, Jesus started giving you the example. If you want, how many people around us today have the money, have the job, have the diploma? They don't have happiness. God has created you to serve, not to be served. Our society thinks about how can we be served, and that's why we're not happy.